Hi everyone. Have you ever felt out of touch? Or perhaps even out of time? Well then I have a great story to talk to you about today, and that of course is the 1999 movie adaptation of Spriggan. Now Spriggan is a series of manga works which was later revived into an original net animation in 2019, although we're not going to touch on that here. We're only going to touch on the 1999 movie. And anyways, it's a series which centers around the idea of out-of-place artifacts. Now, for those of you who might not know what that term is, an out-of-place artifact is something found in archaeology that seems much more advanced than everything else around it or the time period that it is supposedly found in. A very obvious example of this could be if someone was excavating Roman ruins and they somehow found a modern calculator. But the calculator itself is somehow 2,000 years old. Now that's a made-up example, I've never heard of that happening, but that kind of sets the bar for what an out-of-place artifact is, and it's a very interesting concept open to a lot of creative ventures. Spriggan is one which capitalizes on it, and they feature prominently in the movie which we're going to discuss today. And that movie is one, with a few caveats, that I would definitely recommend seeing. After last week's video on Rosafon's movie, I'm glad to say that we're back on track on this channel, making positive videos about competently executed things, although I will say that this movie goes on above and beyond competent in many ways, and is something of a great theatrical experience, with one caveat we'll get to later. I love all of the weird concepts and ideas that feel very natural and in line with the idea of out-of-place artifacts, and how they really enhance the scope and grandeur of this film, something I think it also deserves praise for. The film itself is also very beautiful. As a theatrical production, it is something that a lot of time and animation effort went into. I mean, just look at all these credits. It is a beautiful work that is extremely fluid and well animated at times. On a surface level and on a conceptual level, Spriggan is a very fun and strong piece. It's not the best on a character level or even on a logistical writing level, but it's still competent in those regards, and there's nothing in this movie that really drags it down. Everything at the very least is competent, and everything at the very least is fun. I can see why this movie was recommended to me by a lot of people, and so without ado, let's start to get things off by getting into the plot, as we do. Now Spriggan follows Arkham operative Yu Omine as he adventures to eastern Turkey to protect the Arkham excavation of Noah's Ark. Now in the universe of Spriggan, out-of-place artifacts are a relatively common occurrence, and the organization Arkham works to prevent their misuse by rival factions. All of these artifacts are extremely powerful remnants of a technologically advanced civilization that was doomed by the misuse of their own advanced technology. Anyways, Yu personally decides to undertake the mission after an attempt on his life emboldens him to take a stand against those trying to intimidate him into specifically avoiding the Ark. Once arriving in eastern Anatolia, Yu protects the excavation team, led by Dr. Maisel, from the attacking Machiners Platoon, a US Special Forces group trying to secure Noah's Ark for themselves and the Pentagon. While Yu and fellow Spriggan member Jean Jacquemond defeat Machiner Platoon members Fat Man and Little Boy, the super psychic cyborg Colonel MacDougal proves more threatening and even manages to defeat Yu, kidnap the Doctor, and access the inside of the Ark, something never before done before, thanks to his possession of the magic power Dorito. Anyways, while all this is occurring, Little Boy escapes and causes some more chaos at the excavation site, although he is killed, and Yu regains enough consciousness to enter into the Ark to stop MacDougal and rescue the Doctor and his assistant, Miss Margaret. While all this is happening though, MacDougal kind of explains to the Doctor and his assistant that Noah's Ark is actually a climate control station left over by the previously technologically advanced civilization mentioned earlier. In a sense, is basically Earth's thermostat. It can greatly warm or cool the world should the user decide to employ it in that sense. However, MacDougal also points out that while this seems like a relatively simple function for this piece of technology, it also serves as some kind of genetic laboratory that is even capable of creating new life. While the Pentagon originally wanted control of the Ark to simply, possibly, solve the environmental issues of the world and of course also to flex on everyone else, MacDougal goes rogue and states that he wants to use the Ark to flood the Earth again and reset life anew. Now of course the Doctor refuses to help him in this mission, and an enraged MacDougal decides that even if he can't create more life, he's at least going to destroy what's already here. He's at least going to destroy humanity. He then activates the Ark and triggers massive climate disasters worldwide. Before this can get too out of hand though, Yu manages to finally enter into the control room rescue the Doctor and Margaret, and, in the ensuing fight, defeat MacDougal. However, before he's defeated, MacDougal triggers the Ark's self-destruct system, destroying both him and the Ark. Hugh collapses, but is luckily rescued by Jacqueminot near the very end of the movie as they escape the exploding Ark, and then we zoom out and cut to credits. Starting off on a very surface level, the technicals of this piece are something which need to be praised for foremost before we really get into any of the other stuff that I really liked. The animation here is extremely fluid, it's extremely beautiful and smooth and expressive in a lot of times, and this is one of those pieces where the quality definitely scales in relation to the staffing. When we look at an OVA like, I don't know, Cybernetics Guardian, and we look at the animation credits, you know, we see people that put a lot of work into it, maybe like 10, 12, 13 people, depending on, you know, you count in-betweeners and stuff. But when you get to film like this, and there is a literal minute of animation credits, you know that a lot of people put a lot of work into this, and it's extremely obvious. The action scenes are very smooth and very fluid, and a good job is done with a lot of the character expressions and character designs. There is an impressive attention to detail in almost every frame of this movie, and there isn't that customary 5-minute sequence where we have to repeat a still because we ran out of money, or where the quality just drops off the face of the earth because someone's in the background talking. The entirety of it is very well produced and beautiful. In addition, the creative decisions behind it also go a great way in this regard. The great color palette brings a lot of its scenes to life, and the designs and their details are also very intricate and very fascinating. This is the kind of movie where you could take a frame out of it and frame it on your wall for your guests to talk about. It is a beautiful piece on a surface level. However, there is more to this than just visual beauty. The soundtrack is also something that is very fitting and epic in relation to the scale of the movie and the general action-adventure feel. I don't know why, but this reminded me a lot of like Indiana Jones, and I love that kind of adventurous feel of going to find something which realistically everyone says isn't real, and finding out it's even more fantastical than you could have even believed. Now, I watched this in the Japanese sub and the English dub, and both versions have decent to good dubbing. The Japanese version was pretty good, and the English dubbing was also pretty good, and I did want to point out a few voice actors that I recognized. Chris Patton does the voice of Yu, Mike Kleinheinz does the voice of Fat Man, and Spike Spencer does the voice of Little Boy. His character is literally called Little Boy, which I think is funny because Spike Spencer is most known for doing the voice of Shinji Ikari in Evangelion. I also want to give a massive post-credits editing shout out to my boy Ted Fister, that's his name, at least according to IEBD, who does the voice of Dr. Maisel here, and is somehow a credit that I missed in both my reviews of Gasaraki, Razafon, and the Razafon movie. My apologies to Mr. Fister, now please bask at his name. I also want to point out real quick that Fat Man and Little Boy do sound like funny names, but they're codenamed after the nuclear bombs dropped on Japan, in addition to simply being a fat man and a little man. I did like this little dynamic bridge there. Overall, the technicals of this piece are very beautiful and refined, with the one exception of the sound mixing. Now, I did say earlier in the beginning of this video that there was one caveat to my full recommendation of this movie, and that is the sound mixing. For some reason, all versions of this film, at least all versions that I saw for home consumption, have an oddly high amount of struggles when it comes to mixing sound, effects, music, and dubbing. A lot of the times, certain versions of the movie will swing between very loud scenes and very quiet scenes. The sound effects often feel too loud, and the voice dubbing often feels too quiet. For example, we'll have this fast action scene in Turkey where there's loud gunshots and car crashes and explosions, and you have to have your volume at like 50%. And then we cut to the next scene in the hallway here or whatever where they're talking, and you can barely hear them, so you have to put the volume up to 100. And then in the next scene where Fat Man shows up with his big gun, and you have to turn the volume back down to 50 because it's super loud. Now, obviously, this is kind of a pain doing, so I understand if you just watch it as is, but I will warn you that the massive fluctuations between what is loud and quiet and how quickly they do it did make me physically sick at times. At least when I watched the Japanese version. I watched the Japanese version and the English version to compare the two, and oddly enough, the English version seemed to have better mixing, which was honestly surprising to me. And to confirm that this wasn't just an issue with the quality of the VHS rip that I saw, the Japanese version I saw wasn't the best quality. I also watched parts of the Italian version, And I can confirm that all three versions have this issue with sound mixing, so I don't think it's just I saw a bad rip of it, or that it was a one-off. I think this was a consistent issue with the production. If I had to guess, I want to say that they tried to either make sound too realistic. For example, in scenes where people run away from the camera, they get much quieter very quickly. Or if something's coming towards the camera, it gets much louder really quickly. Which, while realistic, is kind of disorienting and does mess with the overall sound mixing. Or they tried to cram the entirety of a cinematic sound experience into the whole movie version, and hence the hits and action scenes are just overwhelming. I mean, I could see this kind of thing making sense in a movie theater. You want your big bangs and whatnot to really get the audience into that full theater immersive experience. However, when you try to take that home, and then you don't have theater sound audio or volume to make the dialogue pop out as well, well, you have some mixing issues that drastically affect the home version of this movie. This little technical foible is very bizarre to me considering how good all the other technicals are, but it doesn't ruin the movie. Although I do recommend watching the English dub simply because it seems to be the best mixed version of the movie. And it's a shame they couldn't get legendary dub mixer Dick King to sort things right for them. Anyways, getting below the surface level of this movie, I do think that there is also a lot of nice lore and setting set up to this film that really sets it apart. As mentioned earlier, the idea of out-of-place artifacts really lends a great creative lens to view historical and mythological happenings, and it allows for a great expression of creative ventures. I love that Noah's Ark is somehow just the world's thermostat, and it doesn't really make any sense, but it's something that also is extremely fantastic to the point where it doesn't really have any suspension of disbelief issues. Although the one thing I do want to note about that is they said that Noah's Ark in the flood related to it in the Bible is what killed the dinosaurs, which is funny because we know that's not true in either a biblical or a literal sense. I don't think dinosaurs are mentioned in the Bible at all, and the whole dinosaur flood is something that never happened. The dinosaurs were killed by a giant meteor around 65 million years ago, and if you want to time Noah's Ark, that was probably like 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, if you believe that happened. If you believe the biblical story, it was probably about 6 or 7 or 8,000 years ago at the max, which is a lot less ago than 65 million years ago when the dinosaurs died off. And again, they were killed by an asteroid and not like flooding. So I think whoever wrote this wasn't familiar with the whole dinosaur lore thing, but that was the only real nitpick I had with the idea and employment of out-of-place artifacts here. I love their design in the series, and I love the idea that they must be kind of protected. It goes back to this idea that there are things which are too powerful for humanity that humanity simply shouldn't be allowed access to or control of. This is kind of a trope in these kind of things, like you see that in Indiana Jones and television series like The Librarians, but I love that trope of knowing that there's stuff out there and kind of getting to know it, but then pulling back at a certain point and being like, guys, maybe we should just let it be. This is something that we're not truly capable of controlling or understanding. And tying into this not being able to understand, the setting and scope and scale of this movie are truly awe-inspiring. Now, most of the movie does take place around Mount Ariyat in eastern Anatolia, i.e. one setting. However, the scope of the excavation site, the scope of the mountain, the scope of the ark itself are all just so grand, and I love the grandeur of this movie. It truly feels like a cinematic experience, which makes sense because it was made as an actual cinematic movie to be aired in theaters, but you really feel that here, and it's one of the things that animation really masters. Because it's animated, there are no live-action constraints to just making a giant ark floating in the sky, or having this massive weapons site in the middle of nowhere, or having half a mountain detach itself and summon cyclones all across the world. They really took advantage of the fact that anything is possible in the animated medium, and the scale of it is one of those things that really conjures the whimsy of watching an anime or an animated movie as a child. I love the scale of this, and I love how grand it feels, even if some of the characters or lore don't necessarily feel that grand. Now, I say the characters because I think my one, not criticism, but the weakest part of the movie for me is the characters. No one here is horrible or annoying, but everyone just kind of comes off as, competent. Dr. Maisel is the good-hearted doctor who wants to do what's right and tries to stop the villains because he has a conscience. Margaret is his steadfast assistant. Jean Jacquemont is set up as kind of the friendly rival or best friend or sidekick of However, he's in the movie so little, he literally just shows up for plot reasons, i.e., we need to fix this somehow, have Gene fix it. So he does feel kind of superfluous or tacked on at points. And Yu himself is not the most compelling protagonist. He does have a tragic backstory that fleshes him out as a former child soldier who betrayed those who forced him to serve, and this is somewhat inspirational and sympathetic, but not too much time is spent on it. It's just a single flashback near the end of the movie, and all of his actions before this point don't really endear him to the audience much, at least not to me. I mean, he does have funny expressions in moments. I do like that they tried to use visuals to infuse his character with some presence and identity, but since a lot of the focus here is on the lore and the plot and the events happening on screen, character development is not the highest priority, and you can tell that. However, that being said, Yu still has a clear conscience, he's still a good guy, and he still gets the job done, so he is a fine protagonist. The one exception to this character role, though, is, I want to say, MacDougal. MacDougal really stood out to me as a very interesting character. Now, MacDougal is the evil psychic super soldier child who takes over the Ark and wants to kill everyone, but he's not a comically evil villain. In fact, I think MacDougal's writing shows a lot of skill when it comes to writing villains, because he does an excellent job writing this line between psychotic, crazed killer, somewhat logical, at least in his eyes, thinking human being, and perhaps even tragic child character, or tragic character denied the innocence of childhood. And the decision to make him a child is also extremely interesting to me, as it is a source of this tragic air, and the writing does a good job showing childish thoughts and actions poke through his professional exterior. I like that he has somewhat logical motivations. I mean, they're logical to a psychotic killer like him. However, I like the fact that he expresses them with childlike glee or enthusiasm, showing that no, this isn't just some crazy person, but this is a child whose ability to develop normally and grow normally has been stripped away from him, and as a result, he's forced to express himself as a child would in these very bizarre and stressful and violent situations. MacDougal's character is, I'm not going to say super complex, but there are layers to it, and I do like the fact that he portrays the Pentagon, because it makes logical sense that a child whose life has been shortened to 5 years past this point would be bitter and naturally betray the people who did this to him. I like that he's not just a one-minded ideologue who's blindly following what his superiors tell him. He has critical thinking abilities. He's even the one that deduces that the Ark can be more than just a thermostat. And even though not a lot of time is spent fleshing out him or his backstory, he definitely feels like someone who has a presence, and a defined presence at that. He's not entirely psychotic killer, but he's not entirely tragic child. He's this bizarre but incredibly interesting mix of the two. You can't like him, and you're not going to advocate that he's right because he is a psychotic killer looking out to wipe out humanity, but at the same time, there are logical precedents for where he's coming from, and he's not just someone blindly following orders, and he definitely has his own thoughts and motivations. I really like MacDougal's character here, and he is probably the most interesting character of the entire movie, and I think it should be explicitly stated that I don't think that this is supposed to be any kind of character piece. This is supposed to be a piece which focuses on its unique concept, on its adventure theming, and its action pieces. And in those aspects of it, in addition to its excellent visual technicals, the movie excels. I think that this is an extremely fun and memorable movie, full of enough action and adventure to keep you going, but enough interesting out-of-place artifact shenanigans to get you thinking. Now, it's not super philosophical or anything, but it's not just dumb action fun. There is some kind of unique lore and world building here that really help the movie a lot. Overall, if you want a fun movie and you're not really looking for the most deep character analysis, then I would definitely recommend Spriggan. It's something nice to just turn on for an hour and a half and appreciate the scale, appreciate the beautiful visuals, appreciate the creative thoughts that go into it, and appreciate some good character writing when it comes to the character of MacDougal. I think that this is an extremely solid piece, and I wish I could have seen it when it came out in theaters, both in Japan and for its limited release in America. This was limited to certain theaters in America, but to my knowledge, it was theatrically released in America, and what a time that must have been back in 1998, or 2000, or 1999, or whatever year it was. My point is that if you can find a copy of this, I would definitely recommend watching it, as long as you're okay dealing with the sound mixing issues mentioned earlier. They're not a deal breaker, but if you watch it with headphones like I did the first time, it might make you a little queasy. Like, unironically, like, I got physically sick the first time I watched this, because the first time I watched this was the Japanese version, which, to my experience, had the worst sound mixing. But aside from that little technical foible, Spriggan is an extremely fun and extremely solid, obscure anime memory.